Moonlit fields, late autumn in the southern provinces of the Joseon kingdom. A farmer kneels on the packed earth before a low, wood-beamed magistrate's hall, the air dense with pine smoke and unease. Behind him, his wife clutches a small bundle of white hemp cloth. Beside her, two neighbors murmur about what they claim to have seen. The magistrate, a stern man with a scholar's hat set square on his head, leans forward with a brush poised above the page. He wants the truth, or as close as this village can give it. The farmer swallows hard and speaks in a slow, deliberate voice. "My lord, she walked as a woman, but her eyes were the foxes, and her breath carried the cold of the hills." Quick note: if you enjoy deep dive folklore like this, consider subscribing. Only if you actually like it. The testimony flows. A solitary walk to the edge of a bamboo grove. An unexpected encounter with a woman dressed too finely for the season. A sudden shiver as she smiled. And then, he insists, the flicker of tails in the moonlight. The magistrate does not scoff. He has read enough of the Confucian annals to know the court occasionally records strange things without comment. The room smells of pine, ink, and fear. Outside, the night chorus of insects halts as if listening. This first account is not unique. Through the 16th and 17th centuries, Korea's rural districts murmured about foxes that could shed their form and walk among people. The term for this creature is Kumiho, literally nine-tailed fox. 9 tails, not one, because in East Asian belief systems, tails indicate power and age. To have 9 is to stand at the apex of cunning. The Kumiho is a relative of China's Hulijing and Japan's Kitsune, but its Korean telling carries a sharper edge, more predator than prankster, more peril than play. In the days before oil lamps were common, a fox's cry on a distant hill could set teeth on edge. Farmers swore the animals knew how to mimic the sound of a crying child or a lost woman, luring men from safe paths. Kumiho tales often begin this way. A rural man, a lonely road, a stranger whose beauty feels just a shade too perfect. Within the tightly ordered world of the Joseon Dynasty, where Confucian morality bound families and strict codes ruled behavior, the sudden appearance of such a stranger carried both danger and allure. The magistrate's brush moves slowly. He writes of tracks found near the grove, small, sharp imprints, though no clear heel. The neighbors insist the woman vanished. The farmer's wife says the bundle she carried grew lighter as they neared home. Even if some detail is wrong, the entire room shares one truth. Something unsettled the familiar order that night. Korean fox lore is old, likely older than the Joseon line. Animist layers run beneath it. Mountains, rivers, and stones once thought to hold spirits. In early agricultural society, foxes were among the clever predators that troubled villages, taking chickens, appearing briefly at field edges, then gone. A creature hard to catch becomes, over time, a creature easy to imagine as more than animal. The Kumiho's earliest records suggest a shape changer with a hunger for human flesh or liver. But by the 1500s, when our magistrate writes his notes, that hunger is already tangled with questions of trust, deception, and desire. A fox that can become a woman forces a deeper thought. If what we see can lie to us, what else can? Outside the hall, the moon rises higher, lighting up the tiled roofs and the inkstone at the magistrate's elbow. One of the officials strikes a small gong to end the testimony. The farmer's wife makes a shallow bow and backs away. In the hush that follows, a dog somewhere begins to bark. Short, sharp bursts. and someone mutters that animals always know. This opening moment is important because it shows how a belief lives, not in temples or palaces alone, but in common rooms where someone's voice shakes, where a scribe writes, where a rumor becomes an official line. Each time an official took ink to record a strange event, the story gained weight. Fear, after all, needs only a witness to become something larger. Yet even here, the magistrate's skepticism flickers. Perhaps the farmer mistook a traveler. Perhaps the tales were nothing more than dried grass stirring in the wind. Still, he orders the bell rung at the village gate and tells the watchmen to keep their lamps high. Foxes, whether flesh or phantom, will find no easy welcome tonight. At this threshold scene, we glimpse 3 layers at once. The folk mind, where animals carry intentions beyond their nature. The state mind, where record-keeping turns whispers into potential law. The private mind, where an encounter in the woods can become memory, fear, or fascination. What would you have done? Chased the stranger, or bowed your head and gone home? The Joseon world teemed with omens, comets, earthquakes, birth anomalies. The Kumiho belonged to this same register of meaning. Its 9 tales signaled that the world's edges were not always firm. And so the story moves forward through villages that lit extra candles at night, through fields where men carried blades longer than they needed, through households where mothers whispered to daughters about beauty and danger. This is where we begin. A world not unlike ours, but lit by moonlight, bounded by strict order, and always half ready for the rustle in the grass that might not be just an animal. The Kumiho waits there, unseen but never absent, as brushstrokes dry on a page no one thought would survive the centuries. The magistrate's account fades into the dry crackle of paper, stored in a bamboo chest among tax ledgers and family registries. Yet its quiet lines hint at a wider, older map. A Korea where the land itself seemed alive, every hill and stream carrying whispers. To understand the Kumiho, we must step into that substrate of belief, the ground beneath Confucian codes and palace decrees, where spirits were not poetry, but practical company. In the 15th and 16th centuries, when the Joseon Dynasty was tightening its grip on order, the countryside remained a different world. Imagine it. Rice paddies stretching toward low, misty ridges, thatched houses clustered like cautious animals, the smell of wood smoke clinging to winter clothes. Villagers rose with the sun and retired soon after dusk, and in those long nights, silence was rarely empty. Wind moving through bamboo could become a voice. A fox's bark, short and sharp, might seem like a cry. Here, belief in Gashin, household gods, coexisted with reverence for mountain spirits. Before Buddhism arrived, before Confucian ideals were formalized, the peninsula's people already saw themselves as living among a web of unseen guardians and tricksters. The Kumiho was not yet a 9-tailed beauty of later dramas. It was a shape in the margins, clever, elusive, feared for what it might take. These older animist threads gave foxes a different weight, creatures of threshold spaces, hunters at the edges of light. Consider a common tool, the rice mortar. When not pounding grain, some families turned it upside down near doors, believing its hollow could trap wandering spirits. This is the mental world the Kumiho inherited, a world where the placement of shoes, the angle of a gate, the keeping of charms could be as important as a soldier's blade. Within this frame, the fox became a test. Could you trust what your senses told you? And foxes were everywhere. Korea's rugged terrain, thick with forests and small prey, suited them. Farmers saw their red coats flash at the edges of fields. Hunters followed prints that stopped abruptly, as if the animal had vanished. When livestock went missing, blame was swift. Every culture, when threatened, turns the unknown into a face. For Joseon peasants, that face sometimes smiled back. By the 1500s, we see the slow layering of myth and moral. The Kumiho, unlike its Chinese or Japanese cousins, kept a reputation for hunger, human hunger. Stories told of livers stolen, lives shortened. Why the liver? Because in traditional Korean medicine, it was seen as the seat of courage and vitality. To lose it was to lose the will to live. Thus, the Kumiho's appetite was not random. It targeted the essence of life, but not every tale made the Kumiho a killer. Some called it a seducer, a test of character, even a tragic being cursed to walk the earth until it shed its fox nature. Folk tales recorded women in white joggery, jackets, who lingered at lonely crossroads, offering help or comfort, only to vanish when thanked. Was it always a fox? Or simply a traveler, a lover, a thief? The uncertainty made the stories potent. One scholar's diary from 1539 notes, "They say a fox can live 1,000 years and take the form of a woman, but I have seen women take the form of foxes by their deeds." The line is playful but telling. The fox became a mirror for anxieties about gender, trust, and the dangers of beauty. In a patriarchal society, where a woman's influence was often confined to household and marriage, the idea of one walking free, unbound, clever, and dangerous was unsettling and fascinating, and so protections multiplied. Farmers hung thorn branches over gates, believing no fox would pass. Garlic bulbs, thought to repel unclean spirits, dangled from eaves. Ash was sprinkled at thresholds to catch footprints that might betray a shapeshifter's visit. These were not idle superstitions. They were low-cost insurance. At night, when light was precious and fear was cheap, a little ritual meant a lot. Still, some foxes were spared suspicion. In older shamanic rites, a fox's pelt might be offered as tribute to mountain gods, suggesting an earlier respect for the creature's cunning. To hunt a fox was difficult. To kill one could bring bad luck if done carelessly. The ambivalence remained. Fear mixed with awe, disgust with admiration. The Kumiho thrived in this tension, a story ready to shift shape whenever needed. Pause for a moment. What do you make of such a world? Imagine walking a narrow path after sunset, carrying a small oil lamp, hearing something soft move along the ridge. Would you call out or quicken your pace? These undercurrents matter because they shaped every later case, every accusation, every magistrate's note. The Kumiho was not born as a single legend, but as a cluster of habits, watchfulness, caution, and the sense that not all neighbors are what they seem. In the Joseon mind, the supernatural often lived in the same house as the mundane. As Section 2 closes, the fox is still just a shadow, a possibility glimpsed in torchlight or dream. But its world has been prepared, a stage of strict order and deep-rooted animism, ready for a creature that will blur the line between law and rumor. And when that creature steps forward, tail or no tail, the watchers will swear they knew it all along. The hills shift from quiet earth to whispered rumor, and the fox begins to gather shape. In the dim hours before dawn, fires burn low, and storytellers lean closer to their listeners, speaking of 9 tails flicking like banners in the dark. Here, in the tension between shadow and hearth, The Kumiho is born as more than an animal. It is wit given flesh, hunger veiled in elegance, a creature whose form changes to meet the fears and desires of the people who imagine it. By the late 1500s, Korean chronicles and village tales converge on a theme. The fox that lives long enough becomes something else. The number 9 has resonance across East Asia, tied to completeness and power. In the Joseon Dynasty, already steeped in Confucian hierarchy and Neo-Confucian scholarship, 9 tails implied mastery. An animal old enough, cunning enough, to break the boundaries of the natural world. To the educated, it was metaphor. To the villagers, it was fact. The Kumiho's most striking gift is shape-shifting. Tales speak of foxes who can read the faces of men and women, choosing a mask that disarms suspicion. Some appear as lost maidens, others as scholars, monks, or wandering peddlers. In every telling, a trace lingers, an odd shadow, a gleam in the eye, the brush of a tail just before dawn. Farmers whisper that a Kumiho often studies its prey for days, listening at the edges of courtyards, memorizing the layout of homes. The cunning it represents is as frightening as any tooth. Why such fascination? Because foxes were the tricksters of the Korean landscape, clever enough to evade traps, daring enough to steal food under watch, haunting enough to seem intelligent. And intelligence, when seen in an animal, invites stories. A creature that watches us might one day become us. The Kumiho's motives vary across tales. Some hunger for human flesh or the liver, considered the seat of courage and soul. Others seek to become human permanently, collecting energy or virtue through marriage, trickery, or even kindness. One rural song says softly, "Give her a heart, and she will give hers back. Take it away, and she takes yours forever." Ambiguity kept the fox alive in the imagination. Sometimes a killer, sometimes a lover, sometimes a sad wanderer cursed to walk between worlds. The scholar Seo Gyeongdaeok, 1489-1546, known for his studies in Neo-Confucianism, recorded that villagers feared night travel not only for bandits, but for fox women. He did not mock them outright. Rather, he noted how belief in the fox blended with warnings about greed, lust, and deception. A fox was not merely a beast. It was a test of restraint and wisdom. To fall for the beautiful stranger on a lonely path was to risk more than reputation. There are details too fine to ignore. In many stories, a Kumiho cannot fully hide its true nature. Shadows linger too long, or a tail slips free in moonlight. Some say dogs growl or howl near them. Others insist a mirror reveals their reflection as fox-faced, no matter the disguise. These cues fed communities that valued watchfulness. If even the most charming face could be false, who could be trusted? And so, defenses multiplied. Thorn branches hung over doors, metal needles placed beneath pillows. Villagers avoided certain words after dusk, believing they might call a fox by accident. Some even left small offerings, rice, dried fish, or wine, to appease a creature better fed than angered. Such acts were not always pure fear. Sometimes they were gestures of respect. After all, if a fox could walk like a person, perhaps it understood courtesy. But beauty and terror walk close. The Kumiho's shape-shifting also fed cautionary tales about women who stepped beyond expected roles. A widow traveling alone, a courtesan rumored too clever, a midwife who knew herbs others did not. These could become characters in fox lore. The legend reflected society's unease with those who moved outside the lines, especially women whose knowledge or independence unsettled a rigid order. What would you have seen on a misty road? Would you trust the stranger's smile? Or look for the flicker of a tail in the reeds? These were not idle fancies. Written records from 1609 Jeolla province note unexplained deaths attributed to a foxwoman, described as graceful and pale. The magistrate's comments are restrained but telling. The people are afraid. They believe this creature waits by rivers. His notes sit alongside tax lists and criminal reports, lending a formal weight to rumor. In such a setting, belief and bureaucracy became allies. To modern ears, these stories sound like parable and play. But to the Joseon mind, a shapeshifter's threat was as real as a thief's blade. Whether or not anyone saw a tale, the act of watching for it mattered. It sharpened the senses, made people cautious, bound communities with shared rules. And every sighting, every whispered name, gave the Kumiho another chance to breathe. As Section 3 closes, the fox stands clearer now, no longer a mere animal, but a shifting mirror of the human world. Cunning, beautiful, dangerous, and sometimes kind. Next, we will watch how this creature moves closer to the hearth and into the lines of history itself. Early morning fog lingers across narrow earthen lanes, catching on the ridges of roof tiles and the slender frames of persimmon trees. In the villages of the Joseon Kingdom, every birth was an event, celebrated or quietly feared, depending on the signs that arrived with it. Long before the foxwoman became a familiar figure in rumor, the people were watching for other marks of the strange. A child born on the wrong day, under the wrong star, or with the wrong feature, could stir talk that would one day entwine with the name of Kumiho. In this society, where calendars aligned both Confucian and older lunar practices, omens mattered. A night birth beneath a blood-red moon, a child whose cry came late or not at all, an infant with a thin veil of membrane over its head, called a sangmyo. These were noted in whispers. A call, after all, was seen as a sign of difference, sometimes lucky, sometimes cursed, and difference often invited suspicion. When stories of foxes that could turn human became common, such birth signs sometimes found themselves linked, however unfairly, to the notion of a child marked for strangeness. No one wrote fox in a registry, but a birth that unsettled the midwife could follow a family for years. A boy who wandered at night, a girl who spoke too sharply, a young woman who seemed to know things she should not, all could be folded into the idea that a fox spirit was near. Thus, even before any supposed encounter, the Kumiho lived in people's minds as a possibility, seeded by the smallest divergence from what was expected. The fox, in turn, was seen as a watcher. Stories claim that a fox would circle a village on certain nights, drawn to houses with new life. Midwives, older women who carried the weight of lore as much as medicine, often prepared quiet safeguards, iron needles pinned into thresholds, ash spread like a soft warning, dried peppers hung to ward off harm. They were not only defending against sickness, but against something less tangible, the chance that what arrived in human shape might someday not be fully human at all. This is how belief tightens, not with a single dramatic event, but with patterns. The fox's reputation spread because it fit into a world already alert to signs. A sound at the gate when a child cried, the sudden quieting of dogs, the feeling of eyes in the darkness. Even the fox's natural habits, sly, nocturnal, curious, seemed to confirm the stories. And when those stories mixed with strict Confucian hierarchy, which prized predictability and virtue, the Kumiho became both an intruder and a caution. One tale recorded in oral tradition speaks of a girl born during a fierce autumn storm, her father away, her mother aided by a lone midwife. The story says a fox was seen in the courtyard, watching. The girl grew quick-witted, often wandering alone, and when livestock died mysteriously, suspicion flickered toward her family. No proof came, but the tale lingered. It is these quiet, unfalsifiable moments that gave the Kumiho shape. Never caught, always hinted. Such moments also deepen the gendered frame of the legend. A boy born with an omen might be marked for greatness or strangeness. A girl bore risk of being seen as dangerous, even if she lived blamelessly. Later tales of the Kumiho as seductress, deceiver, or outcast carried this undertone. Society often made the different into the suspect. Consider the magistrate again, quill poised above his paper. Would he have written a child's omen in the same hand that noted taxes? Likely not. But the memory of such things could travel on lips and in letters, unrecorded yet present. And when an unexplained illness or sudden misfortune struck, these early notes of difference were recalled. The fox legend thrives here because it feeds on detail. The turn of a head, the time of a birth, the quiet in a courtyard. People saw what they feared, or feared what they saw, and the fox wore these fears like a cloak. What is more unnerving than an enemy who looks like kin? As the 16th century advanced, so did the number of written warnings. Scholars, even while scoffing, sometimes preserved the whispers. In temple records, a monk noted, "The people say foxes are drawn to the cry of babes. They burn paper charms to guard them. We laugh, yet we do not stop them." Humor and habit can live together comfortably, especially when a child's safety is at stake. What would you have done if you were that midwife, hearing the dog bark, seeing something move at the edge of the lamplight? Would you trust the lock, or the charms you placed above the lintel? The Kumiho's legend, even now, is already thickening. From the magistrate's hall to the birthbed, the creature remains unseen yet present, drawn to difference, feeding on fear and fascination. And the story moves forward, toward the nights when the fox would no longer be content to watch, but would walk boldly among those who feared and desired it. The Kumiho moves closer now, out of the periphery of belief and into sharper form. By the time a child's omens have grown into rumor, the village begins to thread tales of identity and disguise into daily life. And so the fox, with its shifting face, becomes more than an omen of strange births. It becomes a symbol of masks. Joseon Korea was a world of order, but also of secrecy. Villages and cities alike were bound by Confucian ideals, yet human desire and fear wove their own paths through the weave. Every household had its customs, every family its reputation to protect. A fox that could look like a person fed these quiet tensions. Was the stranger at the market really what she seemed? Did the polite scholar passing by hide a tail beneath his robe? Such questions could feel dangerous and thrilling at once. The Kumiho legend flourished because it could carry many faces. In some stories, she is a courtesan whose grace hides lethal cunning. In others, she is a scholar with an impossible memory, speaking truths no one should know. One tale recorded in the late 1500s tells of a nobleman traveling home under moonlight. He meets a woman at a roadside pavilion, her white garments bright even in the dark. She is courteous, her voice low, and he is charmed. They walk together until the dogs at the next village erupt in barking. He turns to look, and the path behind them is empty. These stories do more than entertain. They reveal anxieties about trust, class, and gender. In a society that prized rigid roles, the idea that someone could move between them was unsettling. The Kumiho became an echo of these fears, a creature who could be low-born and high-born, gentle and cruel, humble and dangerous, all within one night's walk. And then there was the matter of hunger. The fox's appetite, said to center on the liver, gave a moral edge to its disguises. The liver was understood not only as an organ, but as the seat of courage and life. To lose it meant more than death. It meant the loss of essence. Thus, the fox woman's charm was deadly. She might sit in a courtyard, weaving or reading, yet her eyes were said to seek that hidden core. Was she beautiful because she was dangerous, or dangerous because she was beautiful? This tension between the familiar and the alien, between trust and danger, made the Kumiho a compelling figure. Even palace records hinted at unease. In the Annals of King Seonjo, R. 1567-1608, there are references to fox talk as slander or rumor, a way to describe lies that harm reputations. Language itself had adopted the fox's shadow. To accuse someone of fox-like behavior was to call them cunning, deceptive, or dangerous. Yet not every fox in story was cruel. Some were wise, some even kind. There are tales of Kumiho who loved sincerely, who returned favors, who sought to become human not by deceit, but by patience. These stories, though rarer, show another side. The fox as outcast, longing for what it cannot have. One quiet folk song speaks of a fox who hides its tails beneath willow branches, watching the homes of humans. Give me one smile, and I will forget my hunger. Give me a name, and I will remember you forever. Protective measures still grew alongside these softer tales. Garlic, needles, and thorn branches remained staples. Farmers taught their children to avoid solitary travelers. Night roads were avoided unless necessary. And yet, curiosity often triumphed over caution. How could it not? To meet a stranger in the dark, to wonder what lies beneath a calm face, is as old as storytelling itself. It is worth asking, what would you have done? If a friend swore that the gentle new seamstress in the next village was not what she seemed, would you laugh? Or would you watch her hands a little too closely? The Kumiho legend is powerful because it holds up a mirror. It suggests that deception is possible, that beauty may hide danger, that danger may wear kindness. Each mask the fox wears is a comment on our own shifting selves. This is why the fox cannot be caught. It is always one step ahead, one face removed, one word away from slipping back into the night. By the close of this section, the Kumiho is no longer a distant watcher. It stands among the people, smiling. It is invited into homes, spoken of in courts, feared and admired in the same breath. It has learned our faces, and it will use them well. By now, the Kumiho is a presence felt as much as imagined, and the people begin to build their defenses. When an unseen thing can wear the face of a neighbor, every sound in the rafters, every movement in the yard becomes worth noting. The stories of Joseon speak not only of foxes with cunning, but of households alive with small, deliberate acts of protection. Picture a village night, moon high, oil lamps low. Families draw closer to the hearth, their homes simple yet precise. Each beam and doorway is placed with intention, and among those intentions are charms meant to keep trouble out. In Korea, such measures are known collectively as apotropaics. objects, and rituals designed to ward off evil. When foxes were suspected to walk as people, these protections became common sense. Garlic hung from the eaves. Its sharp scent was thought to drive away spirits. Some midwives claimed it kept both sickness and foxes at bay. Iron needles were slid into thresholds or sewn into garments, as iron was believed to resist the supernatural. At the entrance, people sometimes scattered ash or flour, a pale dust meant to catch footprints. If a visitor left no trace, suspicion grew. Shoes were turned upside down before bed, an odd but persistent habit said to confuse wandering spirits. Dogs were kept lean and alert. A barking dog was often considered the surest warning. In some regions, bamboo charms were placed near doors, the hollow sound they made in wind like a reminder to anything unseen that this house was watchful. These were small acts, easily repeated. They were also communal. A neighbor's gate might be checked by another, charms shared, remedies passed along. Protection was not just a private act, but a shared language. It helped knit villages together around a common unease. The idea that cunning could enter uninvited. Written records preserve some of these details. In the 1609 Giola letters, a scholar mentions small needles pinned by wives into window frames and branches of thorn laid across roofs. He writes with curiosity rather than scorn, noting that these acts gave comfort. In a world where medicine was uncertain and night travel risky, a little ritual was a reassurance, proof that something could be done. But protections also fed the legend. Every charm implied a threat. Every act of defense acknowledged an enemy worth defending against. The Kumiho thrived on that attention. Even skeptics sometimes joined the habits. A monk in a temple diary remarks, "I laugh, yet I place the thorn." It costs nothing to be safe. Not all measures were passive. Some were hunts disguised as watches. Villagers spoke of setting out bowls of cooked beans or rice wine at crossroads, hoping to distract or lure the fox. Dogs were tied near courtyards to scent the air. Men carried long knives on evening rounds, though few claimed to have used them. These rituals created a rhythm. Suspicion, watchfulness, small victories over fear, and yet, for all the needles and charms, the Kumiho remained elusive. Sometimes the charms failed, or seemed to. When cattle died, when children fell ill, the fox was blamed even if no sign was seen. Every unexplained misfortune found a place in its shadow. Did someone forget to turn a shoe? Did a gate stay open too long? Such questions kept the mind alert and the story alive. There is a lesson here. Fear is often fed less by proof than by preparation. A stranger's glance, a dog's growl, an unfamiliar perfume in the courtyard, each could become evidence. The legend invited participation. It asked every household to act, and in acting, they carried it forward. What would you have done if your neighbor swore she saw a fox smile through a window? Would you add another needle, or shrug and pour the wine? These protections also deepened the fox's meaning. It was not just a predator, it was a reminder of vulnerability. To guard a threshold is to admit that something could cross it. The Kumiho lived there, between the known and the guest, growing more vivid with each charm tied to a doorframe. As Section 6 closes, the village is armed but uneasy. The fox remains unseen, yet its presence has shaped every home. We move next toward the seats of power, where even magistrates and scholars will feel compelled to respond. The Kumiho is no longer a countryside whisper. It is becoming a matter of law and order. The fox's whispers have moved from the hearth to the hall. In the Joseon court, Even the most rational minds could not entirely ignore the pulse of belief running through their provinces. The magistrate who first heard a farmer's testimony may have thought it a curiosity. The ministers who later debated witchcraft and sorcery treated it as a question of control. And here is where the Kumiho enters a new arena, not as rumor alone, but as a shadow in the records of governance. The Joseon state was deeply Confucian, committed to hierarchy, reason, and the written word. Yet it governed a land of mountains and mist, where local customs were older than the dynasty itself. Magistrates, appointed often from scholarly families, were expected to uphold both law and harmony. And harmony sometimes meant addressing what frightened the people, even if it lived beyond the pages of orthodoxy. From the 15th to the 17th century, royal edicts occasionally touched on forbidden rites, targeting shamans, charms, and spirit practices that might disrupt order. A line in the Annals of King Jeongjong, R. 1506 to 1544, refers to vulgar beliefs of fox spirits leading men astray. Another, later in the Annals of King Seonjo, R. 1567 to 1608, records a magistrate's petition to investigate deaths, rumored to be the work of a fox disguised as a woman. Neither line proves a creature prowled the hills, but both show an administration aware of the power of talk. This was partly about language. The word fox became shorthand for deceit, seduction, even treason. A sly official might be called yeohu, foxman, implying a danger hidden behind civility. A woman suspected of manipulation could be likened to a fox, her cleverness framed as threat. Thus, the legend leaked into politics, shaping metaphors as much as fears. Local officials had to tread carefully. A magistrate faced with a frightened village could not laugh too loudly. Laughter could look like neglect. Sometimes ritual was sanctioned, not because the state believed in spirits, but because the people needed reassurance. A fox hunt might be ordered. A shaman might be tolerated for a season. Charms might be allowed so long as they did not challenge authority. These moments show the dance between policy and belief, officials keeping the people calm without endorsing what they deemed superstition. One such story, preserved in letters, tells of a provincial magistrate in Gyeongsang Province, 1580s, who ordered the ringing of bells and lighting of torches around a manor after livestock deaths were blamed on a foxwoman. No fox was found, but the measures quieted fear. Another account speaks of monks accused of harboring a kumiho within temple walls, though the charge was likely a political jab. In each case, the fox was less an animal and more a pressure point in society, an explanation for what could not be named otherwise. The scholars, too, debated. Some saw fox tales as rustic nonsense. Others considered them moral parables. A few, curious, collected them like specimens. The literati of the Joseon prized careful observation, and among their essays are notes on animals, weather, and curious events. A scholar might write, "The people say a fox walks by night in the shape of a woman. It is a lie, yet I am pleased to see them cautious." Humor softened disbelief, but it never fully erased the story. What would you have done as a magistrate faced with a grieving family? A village murmuring of foxfire, a night of restless dogs. Would you punish talk or record it? Would you order charms burned or place one quietly on your own gate? The Kumiho's endurance owes something to this official ambivalence. By neither fully denying nor fully endorsing, the state allowed the fox to remain, a creature of the margins, moving freely between law and legend. The tension between court record and common fear gave it strength. A story ignored might fade, A story whispered in the halls of power acquires weight. Thus, the legend grew, nourished by ink and silence alike. Farmers saw eyes in the fields, scholars saw metaphor, ministers saw disorder. Each gaze shaped the creature differently, and all the while, the fox waited, content to be everything to everyone: spirit, seducer, scapegoat, joke. As Section 7 closes, we leave the quiet courtyards and step toward a broader stage. Soon, the fox will not only haunt the edges of villages, but stand accused in petitions and case files. Its world is widening, its roles multiplying, and its shape becoming harder to deny. Autumn winds comb the hills of the southern provinces, carrying with them a thin chill and a whisper of something unsettled. It is the year 1609 in Jeolla province, and a clerk with a steady hand unrolls a sheet of mulberry paper to record what will become known as the Jeolla letters. These letters, more than idle gossip, are reports, a magistrate's attempt to make sense of stories moving through his jurisdiction. In them, the fox is no longer only rumor. It is cited alongside events, dates, even names. One letter speaks of a series of deaths in a hamlet near the coast. Livestock found torn but not eaten. A young man discovered pale and lifeless at the edge of a bamboo grove, his face strangely calm. Witnesses claim a woman was seen near the village days earlier, beautiful, solitary, and gone by dawn. The letter does not confirm or deny, but it lists the accounts carefully. The people fear a fox spirit, calling it Kumiho. They have placed needles in doors and lit fires through the night. The magistrate adds only, "Though I doubt the matter, it is my duty to calm them." The letters reveal a tension between belief and record. Officials, shaped by Confucian discipline, rarely indulged superstition, yet they wrote these lines anyway. Why? Because every frightened village was a problem to be solved. Fear could unsettle crops, delay tax collections, cause unrest. A fox, even imagined, could become a civic matter. Another account describes a traveling scholar, weary from study, who vanished on a night road. Days later, farmers found his belongings near a clearing. A hunter swore he saw paw prints mingled with human steps that seemed to stop suddenly in soft earth. Again, the magistrate records, "Though it may be the work of thieves, the people claim a foxwoman walks these roads." He ordered torches lit along the river path, not because he believed, but because precaution cost little. Such case files are precious windows. They show how the Kumiho existed, not only in fables, but also in the administrative mind, a problem to be managed. They also reveal something universal. When events defy explanation, humans fill the gap with story. And when a story is powerful, it earns ink. The letters mention smaller signs, glowing lights near burial grounds called foxfire, blue-green flickers said to dance in damp soil. Farmers swore these lights marked the presence of a fox spirit, though today we know they can be caused by decaying organic material releasing gas. Still, at the time, foxfire was an omen. A glow in the night was not chemistry, but a message. Even the language of the letters suggests restraint. Magistrates often added phrases like, "they believe," "it is said," or "sources differ." This careful distance allowed them to document without endorsement. But each record preserved the Kumiho's shape, carrying it forward, turning a local fear into a written tradition. Think of the effect. A farmer's whisper becomes a clerk's note. A clerk's note becomes part of a governor's packet. Eventually, it might travel to Seoul, to the royal archives, where it sits beside edicts and border reports. A foxtail brushing a doorway in a coastal village suddenly lives in the same realm as tax disputes and land surveys. For the villagers, this was validation. If it is written, it matters. Modern readers might ask, were these deaths explained later? Some likely were. Illness, robbery, animal attack. But what mattered more was the frame, an unexplained event met by ritual and record. The magistrate's job was not to confirm the supernatural, but to maintain order. And so the Kumiho became both suspect and tool, a way to unify frightened people, to justify a watch, to quiet panic. What would you have thought, holding such a letter? Would you smile at the farmer's fear, or feel a shiver reading of lights in the woods? These Jeolla letters are fragments, but they matter. They show that the Kumiho, by 1609, was more than a fireside story. It was a name with weight, a cause for meetings, a reason for bells to be rung. Even without belief, the state's ink made the creature real enough to endure. As Section 8 closes, the stage is set for more vivid detail. The moments when suspicion would rise to action, when hunts were organized, when rituals turned serious. The fox was becoming an actor in public life, its legend woven into the fabric of community and court alike. The Kumiho's shadow deepens now, no longer a passing rumor or a quiet entry in a magistrate's notes. It begins to stain the imagination with color and threat. By the early 17th century, tales of the nine-tailed fox were sharpened into sharper edges, no longer merely a wandering spirit, but a hunter with specific hungers. At the center of these fears lay blood and the liver. In Joseon thought, the liver was more than flesh. It was the seat of life and courage, the organ believed to anchor the soul's vitality. The Kumiho's appetite for it, so the stories say, was not gluttony, but strategy. To take the liver was to take the essence, leaving the body emptied of resolve. Whether by claw, charm, or kiss, this theft became a chilling metaphor. Magistrates wrote cautiously, but people spoke boldly. Letters tell of bodies found pale and stiff, no wound clear, fear filling in the rest. Some said the Kumiho drained life with a touch, others that she used a hidden mouth, a tongue like a whispering snake. There is a folk poem from the late 1500s, still sung in fragments. Beware the one with moonlit eyes, her words are silk, her hands are knives. Your courage tastes like sweetest wine, she takes it all and leaves no sign. This was the danger of beauty mixed with cunning. In a society where appearance and duty mattered, a creature who could charm, deceive, and then consume was as frightening as any plague. But not all accounts were grim. Some carried a strange sadness. A foxwoman who fed on livers, they said, might do so to become human. The act was both crime and quest, hunger and hope. Such duality fueled countless fireside talks. A farmer tells his sons never to trust a lone traveler. A scholar warns his pupils against vanity and false friends. A mother, brushing her daughter's hair, repeats the story of the fox to teach caution. These were not only tales of monsters, but of manners, rules folded in animal skin. Written accounts also note curiosity. Scholars debated if the fox was only a symbol, lust, greed, betrayal. The Annals of King Gwanghaegun, R. 1608-1623, contain a short line. The people speak of a foxwoman. We have no cause to believe it, but caution is wisdom. It is one of many phrases showing a government aware of talk it could not crush. The details grew stranger. Some swore that a Kumiho's saliva could numb the will, or that she carried a fox bead, a small luminous orb said to hold memory and power. Lovers, they claimed, might steal this bead with a kiss and gain wisdom beyond measure. Others believed it was the key to the fox's soul. To lose it meant to lose her strength. To gain it was to hold her heart. Such ideas added layers. A killer, yes, but also a keeper of secrets, a vessel of knowledge. The magistrate's files reflect the tension. One case in the Haenim region mentions a young woman accused of sorcery after a neighbor's unexplained death. No proof was found. The charge was dropped. But the words fox-like appear in the notes, a quiet stigma that might have followed her for life. This is how legend wounds. Not always with claws, but with whispers. The practical mind asks, could foxes kill? They could bite, spread rabies, startle, raid. But the killings described were often clean, too tidy for animals. This gap between reality and report was where the Kumiho thrived. When reason failed, story took its place. What would you have thought, hearing of a body pale and untouched, neighbors swearing of a strange woman seen days before? Would you dismiss it, or keep a lamp burning? The fox, by now, has many faces. Lover, predator, thief of life, seeker of humanity. Each story adds a tale, each tale another thread, and still she walks the roads of Joseon, silent but never alone, carried in talk, ink, and fear. As Section 9 closes, the appetite is clear, the danger sharpened, and the mystery deepened. Soon we will see the tools made to catch her, the hunts begun, the rituals shaped to stop what could not be seen. The world of Joseon has now grown restless with rumor. By the time blood and liver were fixed in the minds of the people as the Kumiho's feast, the question became urgent. How do we know if it is here? Fear invites invention, and the Koreans of the 16th and 17th centuries were nothing if not inventive when it came to protecting their homes and names. Thus arose a strange art, the quiet science of finding what might not exist. Imagine a small village at dusk. Doors are barred, lamps set low. A man stands in his courtyard scattering white ash across the ground. Another hammers an iron pin into the frame of his gate. A child watches as his mother hangs garlic under the eaves, not for taste, but as barrier. To them, these were not oddities. They were precautions. If a fox walked as a woman, let it leave proof. If it dared to enter, let it stumble at the door. But as fear sharpened, so did the methods. Villagers and magistrates alike began to speak of tools for detection. Bells tied to door frames would chime when nothing seemed to pass. Ashes at thresholds caught the lightest print. Dogs were trained to growl at strangers. Some swore a dog could sense the Kumiho's presence, hair bristling, voice deepening into a low, unshaken bark. A dog's reaction might confirm what eyes could not. Mirrors also came to hold a certain power. One rural belief claimed that a true fox could not hide from its reflection. A tail, an ear, a flash of fur might betray it. Mirrors were placed near entrances or leaned against the floor when visitors came, the polished bronze catching candlelight like a quiet guard. In households with suspicion, a guest might be subtly offered wine near a reflective surface, not to share drink, but to watch the truth. The methods were varied and not all benign. Some villagers kept watch with bows or long knives. Others sought shamans, believing a priestess might sense what common folk could not. In temples and remote hills, rituals were performed to identify spirits. The beat of drums, echoing through the trees. A monk might chant to drive away a fox's essence, or to call it forth to prove its innocence. Whether or not these worked, they gave people something to do, a way to turn helplessness into action. The records of Hanem tell of one such attempt. A young magistrate, confronted by rumors after several livestock deaths, ordered a night watch with bells strung along the village perimeter. Fires were lit at each corner, and the elders were told to keep silent and observe. No fox was found. But the next day, a traveler arriving late was stopped at the gate, questioned for hours. He was let go, yet his face was remembered. Rumor needed no tale, it needed only unease. It is striking how method and myth often blurred. For instance, foxfire, those strange lights seen over damp fields, was sometimes sought intentionally. Villagers believed if foxfire appeared, a kumiho was near. Hunters carried long sticks tipped with cloth to test for phosphorescence. They did not know the science, but they knew the effect. A light that moved in the dark was enough to confirm suspicion. Another layer was added by oral manuals, instructions passed like recipes. A mother might tell her son, "Always greet a stranger twice. The fox cannot answer the same way." A father might say, "A fox forgets its feet. Watch for prints that change shape." These bits of wisdom, practical or not, became woven into common sense. And yet, for all the vigilance, mistakes were common. Travelers accused, neighbors doubted, solitary women avoided. It was a world where a quiet demeanor could be read as cunning, a flash of wit as evidence. The kumiho's best disguise was not a tale, but human misunderstanding. What would you have done? Would you trust the bells ring, the dogs growl, the mirrors shine? Or would you close the door and let the night be what it was? These detection rites reveal something profound. The kumiho was as much about fear of the unknown as about foxes themselves. People needed ways to measure mystery, to draw a line against things that moved unseen. And so they made bells, mirrors, ashes, charms, a net woven from hope and habit. As Section 10 closes, the village stands tense, every sound magnified. The fox has not been caught, but the hunt has begun in earnest. Soon, the stories will grow bolder, the hunts more dramatic, and the lines between superstition and law even thinner. The fox has learned to stay just out of reach. By now, the villagers are weary of charms and quiet alarms. The magistrates have grown restless with reports that lead nowhere. When a thing hides behind beauty or rumor, suspicion thickens like smoke, and sooner or later, someone reaches for a blade. Section 11 belongs to that moment. The hunt. It begins with a story told often in Jeolla province, though versions drift between hills and years. A noble family loses livestock, goats, then chickens, then a prized horse gone lame. The servants speak of a stranger glimpsed at the edge of the property, a woman too finely dressed for a roadside wanderer. The dogs howl at night. When the young master goes to investigate, he claims he sees a figure leap a wall without sound, a glint of eyes reflecting the torchlight. No theft discovered, no intruder caught, but the family calls a hunt. Hunting a fox was one thing. Hunting a kumiho was something else. The fox that walked as a woman was believed to be clever beyond traps, but still bound by certain rules. Elders say it must return to its den before dawn, that it cannot cross running water without effort, that its shadow may betray it even in disguise. Armed with bows, spears, and dogs, men sometimes combed the forest edges. listening for sounds that should not belong. There is a record, fragmentary but evocative, from 1593, a report by a clerk who mentions a pursuit of a fox bride. He notes that the trail was followed into bamboo, that the creature walked in the likeness of a woman but fled like a beast. The words are cautious, but the image is vivid. A chase at night, the air filled with the snap of branches, the pounding of feet. Perhaps it was only a startled traveler. Perhaps not. The hunt was not always violent. Sometimes it was a watch, a waiting game. Farmers posted men at gates, hung bells on wires stretched across paths, scattered beans at doorways, believing the fox would stop to count them. These details, simple, almost childlike, tell us how myth becomes practical. A creature defined by cunning invites clever defenses. Even the smallest action feels like resistance, but when fear swells, mistakes come easily. History is silent on names, but surely some who were accused were only different. A widow who walked alone, a peddler new to town, a girl too sharp with words. Hunts could become spectacles, neighbors gathering not for proof, but for reassurance. If something was caught, a fox, a thief, even a shadow, it was easier to believe the threat had been answered. One famous story, told in Hainam, speaks of a chase that ended strangely. A party of men followed tracks into a marsh and saw a pale woman standing on a stone. She smiled, they say, and asked them what they hunted. The dogs would not approach. The men hesitated. Then one loosed an arrow. The arrow struck the stone. When they looked again, the woman was gone. They found only a single paw print in the mud. Was it story embroidered on fear, or fear embroidered on story? The theme repeats: the broken hunt. So often, the Kumiho escaped. Perhaps because there was nothing to catch, or because the fox was always imagined to be a step ahead. This failure kept the legend alive. A threat removed is forgotten. A threat that vanishes is retold. What would you have done if you were there, spear in hand, hearing the dogs growl, seeing the torchlight tremble on a white sleeve in the dark? Would you shoot or speak? The fox, in these moments, is no longer just a thief of livers or lover of shadows. It is the challenge to certainty, the reminder that some things refuse to stand still. The men return with stories instead of trophies, and those stories grow teeth sharper than any real animal could carry. By the close of this section, the Kumiho has stepped fully into the chase. It is no longer content to watch. It has become something pursued, something that resists capture, something that knows its power lies not in being caught, but in being doubted. The night air thickens over the southern provinces, and the Kumiho seems closer than ever. It is no longer only rumor or chase. Now, it is a confrontation. Section 12 is our first summit, a case described, retold, and preserved enough to feel like a moment when fear, curiosity, and law collided. The story begins in Hainam, a coastal region often mentioned in fox lore. The year is uncertain, some say the early 1600s, but the memory lingers in letters and family records. A village has been restless, animals found dead, shadows glimpsed along bamboo hedges, a woman seen walking alone at night. Her face, they say, was pale and calm, her movements too light. Children were called inside, dogs chained, doors pinned shut. One night, a scream split the quiet. A farmer's son, no more than 17, staggered into the square before dawn, eyes wide, voice broken. He claimed to have followed a figure to the edge of the woods and found not a woman, but a fox of impossible size. its tail, or tails, flashing white as it fled. Behind it, he said, lay a bundle of clothing, a trail of something dark. The magistrate was summoned at sunrise. The record of this inquiry is brief, but striking. It describes a crowd gathered, each witness eager to speak. One saw lights, another heard singing, another swore a woman's laughter cut short. They brought the bundle to the magistrate's hall. A geoghery, a woman's jacket, stained at the sleeve. The boy was shaken, but insistent. It wore her face, but not her feet, he said. The dogs sniffed the bundle and barked, the magistrate wrote carefully. The people believe a fox walks among them. They have placed thorns and bells. I will not argue with their caution. This sentence is important. It shows a balance between doubt and duty. He did not say it was true, but he did not say it was false. In a world where fear could turn to anger, a calm word was as good as a wall. What happened next reads like ritual more than trial. Elders advised a binding rite, a practice whispered of in folk tradition. They gathered bamboo poles, tied red cords, scattered beans at the edges of the fields. A monk came with a drum, chanting to invite or repel. At the heart of this was not spectacle, but control, to turn an unseen fear into a manageable act. The boy walked the circle, speaking his memory, while women lit small fires at the crossroads, and there was the bundle, burned before nightfall. The smell was sharp, the smoke curling like a pale hand. Some said they saw a fox dart through the trees. Others said it was only wind. But after that night, the village quieted. No more animals lost. No more strange figures. Was it proof? Hardly. But it was closure. And that, for a frightened community, is as good as truth. This is how a case becomes legend, by offering just enough shape to carry belief and just enough doubt to keep it alive. The magistrate's file closes with one line. The people are at ease. The fields are safe again. But in every telling, the Kumiho lives on, not defeated, but deferred. The Hainam incident also tells us something about people. They needed action, not certainty. When the unknown frightened them, they made rituals, tools of the mind as much as the hand. Bamboo, beans, cords, fire. Each object a sentence in a language older than the law. This is why the Kumiho endures. It lives not only in the chase, but in the cure, in the steps taken to mend a world gone strange. What would you have done, hearing the boy's words, watching smoke rise into a night where every shadow seemed to move? Would you doubt him, or keep your own lamp burning? As Section 12 closes, we have reached our first summit. The fox is no longer a rumor or a track in ash. It is an accusation, a case, a memory recorded by ink and smoke. It has been named and challenged, but not erased. The road ahead will show more, how the people refined their rituals, how scholars argued, how even the calmest minds could not fully dismiss a creature that refused to be pinned down. The smoke of Hanam's burned bundle fades, but the questions linger. The Kumiho is not defeated. If anything, it has become more alive in the minds of those who witness that ritual. This is the rhythm of belief. One mystery solved, or at least silenced, breeds a dozen others. Section 13 is about binding and banishment, the tools and logic of a people determined to keep their world whole. The Joseon mind prized structure. Even when faced with the uncanny, officials and villagers leaned on method. A creature that could wear a human face needed rules, they thought, and so rules were made. Among them was the conviction that the fox, though clever, was still bound by certain limits. It could not stand before pure light, some said. It feared iron, bamboo, red thread, chanting. These became the weapons of choice. Binding rites were not state doctrine, but they were tolerated when fear demanded them. In mountain villages, a shaman might arrive with a bell and drum, the sound echoing through rice terraces. She would walk a circle, scatter grains, and tie knots while chanting prayers. Each knot, she explained, was a snare, each chant a wall. The fox was clever, yes, but it could not untie what it could not see. The ritual was less about trapping an animal and more about calming hearts. The belief was this: order restored the balance. A fearful mind was an open door. Materials mattered. Bamboo was often chosen because it was strong, hollow, and believed to carry breath and sound that unsettled spirits. Iron, sharp and unyielding, was hammered into thresholds or worn as pins. Red thread was tied to gates, its bright color thought to startle or bind. Even the beans scattered at crossroads were more than food. They were a trick, meant to slow a spirit by forcing it to count each one. At night, when a family feared a visit, the scattering of beans was an act of quiet faith. Make the fox busy, and it cannot harm us. The rituals were rarely violent. More often, they were quiet dramas. A household might prepare by dousing lamps, lining windows with ash, and tying small charms to children's clothing. Dogs were left outside as watchmen, mirrors turned inward to catch an unexpected reflection. In some regions, a monk's chanting joined these acts, blending Buddhist practice with older animist fears. Here we see syncretism, layers of belief folded together, each promising safety where reason could not. The records are thin, but they suggest moments of tension. One diary, dated 1614, tells of a merchant whose daughter fell ill, wasting away though no cause could be found. A fox was blamed. The family called a shaman, who performed a binding rite over 3 nights. When the girl recovered, the story became proof. Was it illness, coincidence, or suggestion? The diary does not argue. It only notes, the people say the fox left when the drum was sounded. These acts served more than superstition. They gave communities a shared language, a way to act together against the unknown. Fear alone divides. Ritual unites. A village tying knots and scattering beans was a village bound tighter by trust. And in a society where harmony was prized, this mattered as much as truth. Still, there was always doubt. Scholars laughed quietly in their letters, calling these rites charming relics of mountain minds. But even they sometimes pinned a needle by their window or burned incense a little longer than needed. Belief is often less about certainty than about comfort. And when something strange moved in the night, comfort was worth the gesture. What would you have done in a house with a sick child, hearing dogs bark and seeing lights in the trees? Would you hammer iron into the door frame or sit calmly with a book? The Kumiho thrived because it lived between extremes, never quite beast, never quite myth, and always adaptable. Each charm, each ritual was a clue to a larger truth. People feared not just the fox, but the uncertainty it represented. By tying knots and lighting fires, they tied their fears and lit their own resolve. As section 13 ends, we see the story thickening. The fox is now met not only with wonder and rumor, but with deliberate acts of resistance. The bamboo creaks, the cords tighten, the dogs keep watch. Yet for every knot tied, another story slips loose, and the Kumiho, elusive as ever, waits for the next door to open. The knots are tied, the charms hung, but words travel faster than smoke. By the early 1600s, what began as quiet rituals and private suspicions found its way into letters, essays, and even royal archives. The fox, still unseen, became a subject of debate, not just around hearths, but among scholars, monks, and magistrates. Section 14 belongs to the pens and the arguments, the minds that tried to explain what the eyes could not. Joseon Korea was a world that loved reason as much as reverence. The literati prided themselves on learning, on neat lines of ink, on the order of the Confucian state. Yet even the best trained minds could not avoid curiosity. When a servant mentioned a fox that walked like a woman, the scholar might smile but still ask questions. Could the fox be metaphor? Could it be a sickness? Could it be something in the hills that no one had named? Letters survive, though often brief. A scholar in 1602, writing to a friend, says, "I hear tales of a fox that takes a woman's form. Surely it is fancy, but the people fear it as they fear famine. We must wonder what hunger drives such visions." Another writes, "A neighbor speaks of a fox woman. I think rather of thieves. Still, I lock my gate." The tone is skeptical, but cautious. They doubted the creature, but they did not doubt the fear. Some took a moral view. Confucian thinkers often used animals as mirrors for human faults. The Kumiho, they said, was not a beast, but a warning, a picture of greed, lust, betrayal. To be called fox-like was to be called untrustworthy, sly, seductive. Women bore the heavier weight of this metaphor. A clever courtesan, a widow with influence, even a sharp-tongued daughter-in-law might be whispered of as fox-hearted. The stories became tools to shape behavior, sometimes kindly, sometimes cruelly. Buddhist and shamanic voices added other notes. Monks sometimes wrote of foxes as restless spirits, trapped between lives. Some said a fox that lived 1,000 years might become enlightened. Others said it wandered, lonely, seeking humanity. These softer readings gave the Kumiho a trace of sadness, a creature cursed to walk among people, always other, always outside. And then there were the arguments. Could foxes glow? Could they speak? Could they really mimic a face? Scholars debated these questions as politely as they debated poetry or land taxes. One essay records, "The fox cannot become human. The people see what they expect. But expectation is strong. It makes ghosts. It makes gods." Such lines remind us that disbelief can respect belief. To call a story false is not to call it useless. These debates mattered because they shaped policy and language. Magistrates learned to listen, but not panic. Monks learned to pray without promising too much. Scholars learned to file such things under curiosity. And yet, every letter, every essay kept the fox alive. The more they explained it, the more space they gave it to exist. What would you have said at a dinner with friends if someone told you they saw a fox woman by the river? Would you laugh? Or would you lower your voice just in case the hills were listening? This is how a legend hardens, not by proof, but by repetition, by being weighed and found interesting, if not true. The Kumiho became an idea that could not be ignored. A clever animal, a cunning woman, a restless ghost, a metaphor for the dangers of trust. It had stepped from story into philosophy, a thing that lived in the mind as much as the field. As Section 14 closes, the fox stands between worlds. It is chased by farmers, protected against by families, hunted in law, and examined by scholars. Each group sees what it needs to see. And for the creature itself, it remains unseen, but it has grown larger than its tracks. a word now heavy enough to change behavior. Soon, that word will reach even higher, into court intrigues and the whispers of the elite, where fear and fascination become tools of power. From the quiet courtyards of scholars to the guarded chambers of palaces, the Kumiho slips upward. By the late 16th century and into the early 17th, its name is murmured not only in villages, but also within the walls of noble houses. It is here, among painted screens and silken shoes, that the fox takes on a new weight. Not merely a wandering spirit, but a subtle metaphor for danger close to power. The court of Joseon, though bound by ceremony and hierarchy, was never free of intrigue. Rumors could wound more swiftly than a blade, and an illness in the royal family could send ripples through the kingdom. Imagine, then, the tension when a young princess falls sick. Some say it was a fever. Others whisper it came after a dream of a woman in white standing at the palace gates. The physicians work quietly, but beyond their screens, the servants whisper a word: Kumiho. This is not to say the king believed in fox women haunting the palace, but fear is rarely reasonable. When ministers heard that the royal dogs barked at empty courtyards, or that lamps trembled in still air, the story grew its own spine. A fox in a field is nuisance. A fox in a palace is omen. Historical notes hint at these murmurs. In the annals of King Seonjo, R. 1567 to 1608, there are small, almost throwaway lines about sorcery, about troubling rumors when royal concubines quarreled, about charms hidden near doors. None mention a fox directly, but letters between officials sometimes use the term yohu, fox woman, as an insult or warning. It was a word sharpened by suspicion, useful for accusing rivals of deception or moral decay. Within noble families, the fox could be a story of seduction or shame. A servant caught stealing might blame a spirit. A failed marriage could become a whisper of a wife who was not what she seemed. In such tales, the Kumiho was often beautiful, refined, and fatally clever. Whether as scapegoat or symbol, it embodied a fear of things uncontrolled, desire, illness, betrayal. These fears did not stay only in words. Protective measures appeared even in wealthy homes, thorns hidden among flowers, charms pinned beneath thresholds, mirrors polished and placed discreetly. If nothing else, these gestures calmed the household, as they did in villages. A palace is only a larger village after all, with more rooms for shadows. In one oft-retold anecdote, a young noble claims to have seen a woman pacing the outer gardens of the Royal Academy, her steps soundless, her robe strangely bright in moonlight. When approached, she smiled and bowed, but said nothing. The next day, an animal's paw prints were found in the dew near the same path. The event was probably nothing, a late visitor, a fox crossing the grounds, but the story became polished with each telling. To some, it was an omen, to others, a courtly joke, to still others, a warning about trust and appearance. The fascination deepened because the Kumiho stood at a crossroads of meanings. She was temptation and punishment, mystery and metaphor. For men in power, the idea of a woman who could charm, deceive, and outwit them was thrilling and unsettling. For women, often confined by strict codes, the fox could be a figure of defiance, a being who moved freely, took what she wanted, and was feared for it, and so the legend thickened in courtly language. The fox became a caution for ministers and an insult for rivals. It became the ghost blamed for restless dreams, and the name for an affair too bold to speak aloud. Each use added another tale to her myth. What would you have done had you been a minister hearing such whispers? Laugh and pour more tea, or check the locks twice before sleeping. As Section 15 closes, the Kumiho is no longer only a creature of the forest or a problem for village magistrates. She has entered the gardens of the elite, becoming part of the language of politics, fear, and desire. From here, the story will bend back toward the common people, showing how households carried these fears as offerings and bargains, some to appease, some to survive. Beyond palace walls and magistrate halls, the story of the Kumiho returns to the people who carried it most faithfully. Families, farmers, and wanderers whose lives were measured by the turn of the seasons. This section belongs to the quiet acts of households, the gestures that were not about law or record, but about care. Sometimes loving, sometimes fearful. It is here that the Kumiho becomes most human. For all the fear surrounding it, some saw the fox not only as predator, but as guest, a being to be respected or even appeased. Records are sparse, but folk songs and oral histories hint at this softer, more complicated face. Offerings and betrayals, these two threads wind together, showing how people negotiated with the unseen. In mountain villages, some families left small dishes of food at the edge of fields. A bowl of rice, a bit of dried fish, even a sip of rice wine. These offerings were said to keep spirits content. Was it really for foxes? Perhaps not. But to place food where the wild began was to admit that the world did not belong entirely to humans. It was an old habit, older than Joseon itself, carried from times when ancestors believed every hill and stream had an owner. The Kumiho, sharp and elusive, was simply one more neighbor to be respected. The practice was not universal. Some households saw offerings as weakness. To feed a foxwoman was to invite her closer, they said. In these homes, doors were shut tight, charms pinned heavy, and visitors watched with suspicion. But even then, the legend seeped through. Mothers warned their sons, "Do not speak too kindly to a stranger at night." Fathers told daughters, "Never follow a soft voice beyond the gate." Each instruction was a layer of protection, and sometimes a cage. And still, people betrayed each other under the fox's name. When livestock died or children sickened, suspicion often followed the margins. A newcomer might be blamed, a solitary woman avoided, a servant dismissed. Whisper, Kumiho, and suddenly a quarrel could turn grave. The legend became a weapon as easily as a shield. There are mentions in local petitions of accusations leading to exile or disgrace, though no case ever proved what was claimed. The fox was not caught, but its shadow could ruin lives. One telling folk story speaks of a young widow who tended fields alone. When her neighbor's chickens vanished, whispers began. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but the name Fox Woman clung to her gait. One night, a traveler claimed to see a pale figure moving among the trees. The next day, a dead hen was found near her plot. She left the village soon after. No one saw her again, but the tale lived on. Was she a victim of chance or something stranger? The truth was less important than the fear, and yet, not every betrayal was cruel. Some families made bargains. A traveler's tale tells of a merchant who claimed to see a fox by the river, its tail glimpsed just before dawn. He left food for it each night, and in return, his warehouse was left untouched when thieves struck other merchants along the road. Was it coincidence? Likely. But the man swore he owed his fortune to a fox's favor, and his children repeated the story with pride. The Kumiho thrived because it could be many things: danger, guest, scapegoat, ally. It wore whatever face the moment required, and in this flexibility lay its endurance. Each home, each family, each story added a shade to the legend, until the nine-tailed fox was no longer a single creature, but a mirror reflecting the fears and hopes of its people. What would you have done in those villages? Would you leave a dish of rice by the field, or bar the door and trust only your locks? Would you suspect the widow, or greet her kindly? As section 16 closes, we see that the Kumiho is not only hunted, but negotiated with. It is a name spoken in anger and in kindness, in fear and in respect. This dual nature, the fox that steals and the fox that protects, will shape the next turns of the story, when weather, sickness, and chance make the legend even larger. The earth turns again, and the people learn to live with the story. By now, the Kumiho is not a single fox, but a season, a shadow, a habit of thought. And like any living idea, it grows when times are uncertain. Section 17 belongs to the weather and the world, moments when the land itself seemed to give the fox more room to walk. The Joseon countryside was no stranger to hardship. Floods came suddenly, winds tore roofs away, drought cracked the paddies, and in those shifting moods of the land, the imagination had fertile ground. A failed harvest might bring famine. Famine brought weakness. Weakness brought fear. People listened more closely to the night then. When dogs barked, they thought of foxes. When rain came heavy, they spoke of spirits pacing the hills. One folk memory says that foxes loved storms. Farmers swore that lightning revealed them, a flash across the paddies, a pale figure at the edge of the trees. Perhaps it was only animals startled by light, but in a world without lamps or cameras, the mind filled what it could not confirm. Rain and smoke, two shapes of the same breath, made the fox seem close enough to touch. Plague added another layer. Illness did not announce itself with certainty, and often struck the young or the strong without warning. Tuberculosis, fevers, strange wasting diseases. These things were poorly understood. A family that lost a child might blame bad air, or they might blame the fox. A clever creature who could steal a liver seemed no stranger than an unseen sickness that drained life overnight. The records echo this. In a letter from 1623, a provincial officer notes, "The rains are long, the people weary. They light fires at the gates, saying the fox fears the smoke. We let them, for it brings them comfort." Comfort is important. It matters almost as much as truth. When the world felt unstable, a ritual was steadier than reason. Travelers carried the story farther. Merchants on the road warned of women who called from the hills, of laughter near bridges when no one was seen. Soldiers marching in mud swore they saw shapes flicker by, their armor creaking in time with footsteps that were not their own. The fox became part of the weather, an explanation for unease, a word for what could not be named. The smell of smoke also marked these years. Villagers burned piles of pine needles to ward off pestilence, sending up columns of white vapor that curled into the clouds. Some said it confused the fox. Others said it pleased the mountain gods. Ritual and weather were joined like thread and cloth. Even a common cooking fire might be stirred more often, not for food, but for scent, as if to remind the unseen that the home was awake. And through it all, the fox remained elusive, the perfect companion for anxiety. It offered a name to fear, a reason to act, and a story to share by the fire. If nothing else, It made the unknown a little less silent. What would you have thought? Hearing thunder at night, the dogs restless, your child coughing in the dark. Would you think only of rain, or wonder if a pale tail slipped behind the trees? This was the Kumiho's quiet strength. It did not need proof. It lived where explanations faltered, in storms, in sickness, in the brief blue glow of foxfire on wet ground. It was fear's other voice, soft but steady. And so the people listened and prepared and told each other to be careful when the clouds gathered low. As section 17 closes, the fox is both everywhere and nowhere, felt in the ground, seen in the mist, heard in the wind. Soon, though, the story will grow sharper again, as officials turn their gaze back to these fears and begin to question who truly rules the night, the fox or the people who name it. The rains have passed, and the ground is firm again. Yet something has shifted. What was once only night talk now moves into daylight scrutiny. Section 18 is our second summit, the moment when authority and investigation meet the legend head-on. By now, the Kumiho is more than a whisper. It is a matter noted in reports, debated in courts, sometimes treated like a suspect. The Joseon state was careful with language. Its officials were trained in Confucian logic, its scribes taught to separate rumor from record. But no system, however disciplined, is free from the people it governs. When villagers came with trembling voices, when nobles murmured of strange sights, when livestock vanished and illness seemed to walk in the dark, the magistrates were forced to listen. It begins in the 1620s with a sequence of petitions from rural districts. A governor writes of disturbances blamed upon a fox spirit, asking for permission to move soldiers to calm the people. Another letter speaks of lights in the hills and voices heard by travelers. These are not wild claims of demons. They are simple, precise notes, framed in the language of responsibility. The officers do not say they believe, but they do not dismiss. They cannot afford to. What might an investigation look like in this era? Imagine a small retinue arriving in a worried village. A magistrate, in plain but well-kept robes, stands in the square. He questions farmers and herdsmen, inspects gates, looks at paw prints in soft earth. He asks if strangers have been seen, if women walk alone, if charms are tied to doors. He writes it all, brush steady, as his assistant watches the crowd. Sometimes the conclusions are mundane: theft, illness, wolves, but not always. One report mentions a figure moving at dusk, described by 3 witnesses as bright as paper. Another mentions a widow accused of hiding something. She denies, but the notes say she trembled. A fox's shadow, even if unseen, can change the way neighbors look at each other. And there are the clashes with faith. Buddhist monks and shamans sometimes came under suspicion, accused of harboring spirits. An officer writes in 1627, "A temple on the hill is blamed for charms and noises. We searched. We found only drums and prayer flags. The people are unconvinced." Even when nothing was found, the act of searching gave weight to the fear. For the people, such attention was both comfort and fuel. To see an official care enough to write, to ring bells, to order guards, was to see the legend acknowledged. And when the problem could not be solved by logic, the absence of an answer became another thread for the fox to follow. The Kumiho, to officials, was a problem of behavior more than beast. It stirred unrest, distracted labor, threatened harmony. But to the villagers, every official footstep, every question, made the fox more real. If the court wrote it down, surely there was something to write. We find one haunting entry. A girl fell ill and wasted away. The parents swore she spoke of a woman visiting her window. The watch was set, but nothing came. The child died. The people burned the bed and sowed salt. They said the fox was gone. The language is dry. The grief is not. What would you have done as that magistrate? Close the case as illness? Or let the people light their fires, if only to soothe themselves? This is the paradox of authority. Even disbelief must act. Each action, every patrol, every bell, every brushstroke, kept the Kumiho alive in ink and memory. By the close of this section, we see the fox standing not just in bamboo shadows, but in documents, reports, questions. It is being chased by the mind of the state, and the chase only makes it more enduring. As section 18 ends, we stand at a higher ridge. The fox is still unseen, but now it wears the weight of record and doubt, walking between belief and governance. Ahead lie the interpretations of the modern world, but the old fears are not yet finished. The records begin to grow thin, but the echoes remain. As the 17th century gives way to later centuries, the Kumiho is no longer confined to magistrate reports or temple whispers. It slips into memory, then resurfaces in study, literature, and even science. Section 19 belongs to modern lenses, the slow, careful ways people have tried to explain a creature they once feared. By the late Joseon period and into the colonial era, Korea's folklore began to attract attention from writers and travelers. The fox woman still haunted stories, but her image was softer, less a terror and more a curiosity. Scholars and poets spoke of her as a symbol: deception, beauty, hunger, mystery. At the same time, foreign visitors wrote of Korea's fox myths with the detached fascination of outsiders, describing the Kumiho as kin to the Chinese huli jing or the Japanese kitsune. The 19th century brought change. Western medicine and natural science reached the peninsula, and with them came new explanations. Illnesses once blamed on spirits were studied. Rabies and wasting diseases were described. Hallucinations from fever or fungi were documented. Travelers wrote of phosphorescent lights in swamps, now understood as methane gas, paw prints in mud, explained as simple fox or dog. And yet, the explanations did not kill the story. They only changed its costume. Folklorists saw patterns. In almost every culture, they noted, foxes stood for cunning. Women were sometimes cast as deceivers or enchantresses. Hunger and beauty often lived in the same tale. They suggested that the Kumiho was less about an animal and more about people, their fears, their desires, their rules. A fox woman was the perfect shape for warning and wonder, a reminder that the world was unpredictable, that trust had limits, that appearances could lie. Psychologists later added their view. They spoke of projection, anxieties about outsiders, about women's roles, about illness and secrecy. A village blaming a fox for sickness, they said, might have been blaming its own uncertainty. A court calling a woman fox-hearted might have been speaking of power and control. The Kumiho, in this view, was a mirror. Yet the fascination survived precisely because it carried so many meanings. Even today, ask a Korean child about a fox, and you may hear about beads of power, glowing eyes, or a sly smile in the woods. Ask an elder, and they may remember a warning given at night, told gently but firmly. Do not stray from the road. Science and folklore coexist easily now. Tourists visit old temples and villages where fox legends are told. Films and dramas reimagine the Kumiho as a tragic lover or an avenger. Scholars trace its roots in dusty texts. The fox, once chased by dogs and bells, now walks freely through classrooms and screens. But the change is not betrayal, it is survival. The Kumiho's image shifted because it could. It traded the silence of hills for the page, then the screen. It moved from omen to icon. It is why we still speak of it, long after the drums have stopped. What would you have thought as a farmer in 1609 if you could see a television drama where the fox is not feared but loved? Would you laugh, or would you nod, knowing that every tale must grow or vanish? Section 19 closes on a bridge between ages. The creature is no longer hunted but studied, no longer suspected but reimagined. The heart of the story, beauty, deception, mystery, remains, but the fear has softened into fascination. Soon we will see how the legend adapted to even greater changes: politics, trade, and the pull of new worlds. The fox has traveled far. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Joseon world had changed. Dynasties faltered, foreign powers arrived, and Korea's landscapes were mapped not only by farmers and monks, but by soldiers, traders, and scholars. The Kumiho, too, found itself reframed. Section 20 belongs to colonial shadows, moments when old stories met new rulers, and when the nine-tailed fox became a curiosity in someone else's book. When Japan annexed Korea in the early 1900s, its officials studied everything: land, language, laws, beliefs. Folklore was not ignored, it was cataloged. Japanese scholars compared Korean tales to their own, noting the similarities between the Kumiho and the Kitsune. They admired the shared cunning, the shape-shifting, the woman who could smile and ruin. But they also treated the Kumiho as quaint, a relic of a people to be governed. Newspapers of the time occasionally mentioned fox spirits. Colonial writers described them with a kind of amused distance. The natives believe a fox may wear a woman's face. They place needles and garlic to keep it away. Such words flattened centuries of meaning into a paragraph. To some Koreans, it was insulting. To others, it was a chance to keep their stories alive by telling them louder. Yet even in these times, the fox adapted. Stories of Kumiho were told in plays, whispered in markets, printed in small books. The figure of the foxwoman shifted again, sometimes villain, sometimes victim, sometimes symbol of the colonized, clever, unseen, surviving. It was easy to imagine a creature who could slip between shapes, thriving in a world where identities were being reshaped by force. Economic hardship also breathed life into the legend. Famines, wars, and new borders meant uncertainty. In those years, people often turned to the familiar. A sickness in a village, a theft unsolved, a stranger's face. These were still sometimes explained with a shake of the head and a quiet word: fox. And while colonial administrators might dismiss it, the people knew better. A story told at night belongs to those who need it. There are notes of resistance, too. Some Korean writers reclaimed the fox, making her clever and proud, a survivor rather than a monster. A tale from the 1920s speaks of a fox who outwits soldiers, saving villagers by leading enemies astray. Another describes a Kumiho who takes revenge on corrupt landlords. The tone had shifted. The fox was no longer only hunger, she was defiance, a reminder that small things could trick the powerful. Meanwhile, modernity crept in. Electric lights replaced oil lamps, roads cut through the hills, cities swelled with strangers. The fox did not vanish. It learned new hiding places. A pale face at a window could still cause a start. A cry at night could still chill the spine. But now, the creature walked also in books, in classrooms, in songs. Its body was made of paper and ink, as much as fur and shadow. What would you have felt reading an article that mocked your grandmother's story? Would you be silent, or would you smile, knowing the fox thrives on being underestimated? As Section 20 closes, the Kumiho stands at a crossroads, no longer just a folk terror, not yet the romantic or tragic figure she would become. She is watched by foreign eyes, recorded by pens that do not know her voice, yet she survives. Soon, she will shed another skin, taking on new meanings for a world racing toward modernity. Time moves forward, but the Kumiho does not fade. She shifts again, this time stepping softly into the margins of memory and art. The colonial lens, with its cool distance, could not quiet her. In fact, it may have given her a different kind of life. Section 21 belongs to heritage and revival, the way rural sayings, dances, and dramas held onto the fox's tail and kept it bright. Long after soldiers left and maps were redrawn, the countryside kept its voice. Villages still whispered to children not to wander at night. Elders still tapped their pipes and said, "Be wary of the woman who smiles too easily." But beyond warning, there was a softer tone. The Kumiho had become part of the household story, no longer only a threat, but a reminder of caution, cleverness, and sometimes beauty. Festivals and plays carried the legend in plain sight. It was not unusual for traveling performers to include a fox woman in their sketches, a sly beauty in a pale jacket, outwitting a pompous noble or tricking a greedy merchant. The laughter these performances drew did not diminish the story. It polished it. Children saw the tales, the masks, the sudden leaps of actors, and they learned to fear a little and smile a lot. Folk painters, too, gave the Kumiho shape. On scrolls and folding screens, she sometimes appeared as a delicate woman under moonlight, a small fox peeking from behind her robes. In poems, she became a metaphor for fleeting love, for trickery, for the sadness of wanting to belong. By the late Joseon period and after, she was already more symbol than terror, but she had not lost her edge. Language remembered her. Even now, you or fox can mean slyness, charm, manipulation. In casual talk, a fox can still be praise or warning. It is a word that lingers on the tongue, shaped by centuries of suspicion and admiration. And yet, the legend did not remain static. By the mid-20th century, as Korea modernized rapidly, writers began to use the fox in new ways. Short stories featured her as tragic, longing for humanity. Stage plays turned her into a mirror of changing times, a creature whose old tricks no longer worked, but whose sadness was deeply human. It was no longer enough to fear her. Audiences wanted to know why she walked at night. Scholars, folklorists, and teachers joined in. Universities collected oral histories, museums displayed masks and paintings. Anthropologists wrote of the fox as a cultural thread. This was the beginning of heritage, the moment when something once feared became something to be preserved. The fox was too interesting to die. Even today, some rural communities quietly honor old practices. A small charm at a doorway, a story told when the lights are low. These are less about fear than about connection. They remind people of who they are, of how their grandparents watched the night. And for children, they are sparks, little mysteries that make the dark less empty. What would you have done, seeing an old scroll in a museum painted with a woman's face and 9 swirling tails? Would you smile at the art, or feel a faint, familiar chill As Section 21 closes, the Kumiho stands not as a fugitive, but as a figure on a stage, a painting on silk, a line in a poem. She has been hunted, doubted, mocked, studied, and now gently kept. The next steps will show how she moved further into cameras, books, screens, and new markets. Her face changing, but her shadow familiar. By the 20th century's end and into today, the Kumiho is no longer only a night whisper or a line in a magistrate's journal. She has found new skins. Section 22 belongs to faith and film, the meeting of the sacred and the commercial, where an ancient fox walks into a theater, onto a TV screen, and into the rhythm of modern storytelling. Stories that once frightened children now light up marquees. In the mid-20th century, writers turned the Kumiho tragic. She is still clever, still dangerous, but often lonely, a creature that wants to be human. Novels gave her feelings, films gave her a face. Directors dressed her in flowing white or crimson, made her silent or witty, made her heartbroken or cruel. The liver, once feared as a target, sometimes became metaphor. She sought not flesh, but love, belonging, or a chance to change. The earliest Korean films to feature the foxwoman treated her like a ghost, a thrill for a darkened theater. In the 1960s and 1970s, horror and melodrama mingled. By the 1980s, folklore was appearing in classrooms. Children read simplified versions. Scholars taught the meaning of the bead, the tales, the hunger. The Kumiho was shifting again, turning from terror to curiosity, then to wonder. Television gave her a wider stage. Dramas recast her as heroine, villain, and sometimes both. She was beautiful, modern, and mysterious, walking the streets of Seoul or the courtyards of historical dramas with equal grace. She could love a human, protect a family, even sacrifice herself. The once feared creature became a mirror for changing ideas of womanhood and identity. The audience still thrilled at the gleam of her eyes, but they also rooted for her heart. Faith, too, found room for her. Some shamanic groups still speak quietly of fox spirits, though rarely as threats. In some regions, the fox is honored as a messenger, a clever intermediary between people and spirits. A few older Buddhist texts even mention foxes seeking enlightenment, tying her hunger not to malice, but to longing. These strands are quieter, woven into private rituals and folk memory, but they are alive. The Kumiho has also become a brand. Tourism brochures show fox statues and mention legends. Festivals stage plays where foxes dance under lanterns. Museums display artifacts, masks, paintings. The once feared creature now invites photos. And on the internet, her name tags everything from novels to music to fan art. It is a strange but fitting homecoming for a shapeshifter. She thrives wherever eyes turn. What would you have thought, standing at the edge of a bamboo grove centuries ago, if you could see a billboard with her face on it? Would you laugh at the glow, or look away, half wondering if she could still hear you? The fox is now many things: folk villain, tragic lover, pop culture star, soft superstition, gentle memory. Through all these changes, she keeps the same core: cleverness, beauty, danger, longing. Her 9 tales move easily from one century to another. As Section 22 closes, the Kumiho is no longer just a story of villages. She is a symbol, an actress, a subject for artists and believers. She has learned to live in neon light as easily as she did in candle flame. Ahead, the fox will meet the critics and skeptics, those who will question her entirely, and those who will keep her alive in every doubt. The fox that once hid in the hills now stands in full view, But even the brightest stage cannot quiet the oldest instinct: doubt. Section 23 is about skeptics and scholars, the pens and voices that ask whether the Kumiho was ever real, and why the story stayed when so many others faded. By the late 20th century, Korean universities began to treat folklore as a serious study. Professors collected songs and sayings, traveling to remote villages to record elders who remembered the old paths. What they found was not only fear, but humor, longing, and craft. The fox, they wrote, was a thread woven through daily life, part superstition, part lesson, part entertainment. And always there was the question: how much of this is memory, and how much invention? Modern skepticism sharpened the legend. Biologists pointed to the behavior of real foxes: nocturnal, clever, adaptable. Psychologists spoke of projection, a society wary of strangers, of women who moved freely, of illnesses that came unseen. Anthropologists noted parallels with other cultures: the kitsune of Japan, the hulijing of China, the selkie of Scotland. They argued that such beings emerge wherever the unknown touches ordinary life. The Kumiho, they said, was never about a single animal. It was about what people feared and desired. Travelogues from the 19th and early 20th centuries are revisited today with fresh eyes. A Japanese colonial report might describe the fox woman as a foolish superstition. A Western missionary might call it quaint. Modern readers see more: evidence of control, misunderstanding, even quiet resistance. The fox was sometimes a joke, but she was also a keeper of culture. Each doubt, each sneer, is now a clue to what people valued enough to defend. There are voices that love the contradiction. Writers point out that disbelief often makes legends stronger. A scholar once said, "If a thing is laughed at, it can hide longer." The Kumiho did just that, slipping past the ridicule of newspapers, surviving classrooms where students rolled their eyes, waiting for curiosity to return. And return it did. Every drama, film, or webtoon about the fox owes something to those who doubted her, because they kept her name alive. Even the documents left by skeptics read like stories. One diarist, after investigating rumors of a fox attack, writes simply, "I saw nothing, but the people swore they saw light in the trees." That single sentence is the tension of all folklore. Nothing seen, everything believed. What would you have done if you were the one with the brush, hearing villagers plead for help? Would you laugh, or would you write it down, thinking of the generations to come? Section 23 stands as a quiet cliff. The fox has been caught in ink, debated, dismissed, defended. Each doubt gives her a new outline, sharper than before. Soon she will stand in the open not as a hunted thing, but as a heritage, an emblem carried forward because people would not let her go, even when they said they no longer believed. By now, the Kumiho is not hunted, not feared, not even questioned. She is carried. Section 24 belongs to heritage turned outward, the moment when an old fox finds herself in the light of festivals, textbooks, and global screens. This is the pre-final turn. Before the quiet close, the fox is as visible as she will ever be. When Korea rebuilt and modernized in the late 20th century, there was an urgency to remember. Wars had torn through fields. Cities rose quickly. Language and customs were under pressure from change. In this environment, folklore was not discarded, but curated. The Kumiho, once a nighttime whisper, became a symbol to study and sometimes to celebrate. Museums gathered scrolls, paintings, charms. Scholars collected oral stories and transcribed them for libraries. In classrooms, children heard the fox's name in literature lessons. Teachers spoke of her as a cultural figure, like a living metaphor. Was she real? No, they said. But she was important. She told us something about caution, about cunning, about desire. She was a mirror of times and fears. Festivals followed. In some towns, actors in fox masks danced under lanterns, their tails bright strips of cloth swirling in the night air. Drums echoed old rhythms, and laughter replaced fear. Children reached for candies shaped like fox beads. Grandparents told short versions of old tales. These events were playful, but they carried something serious, a sense that these stories were not just entertainment, but part of identity. The media, too, made her new again. Novels gave her motives. Television gave her lovers and battles. Films made her sad, dangerous, or wise. By the 21st century, the Kumiho could be a pop star, a cartoon, or a tragic heroine. She could walk the hills of a historical drama or the neon streets of Seoul. Each version was different, but each carried the same glint. The shapeshifter's eye, the quiet power of something too clever to vanish. Tourism took note. Guides pointed to old temples and villages, telling travelers of fox women and glowing fires. Shops sold charms with 9 tails, shirts with sly smiles, masks painted with gold and red. For some, it was novelty. For others, pride. The fox became an export, a reminder that even in a digital world, a story from bamboo groves can find an audience anywhere. Skeptics still wrote, but now their essays sat beside art books and DVDs. The question was no longer, is she real? But why do we still care? And the answers were many. She is beautiful. She is clever. She is ours. What would you think? Walking through a festival where the old fears have become games. Would you smile at the dancers, or wonder if somewhere a real fox watches quietly from the edge of the crowd? Section 24 is a pause before the close, a deep breath. The Kumiho is no longer a creature of shadows. She is a figure of heritage and imagination. She has learned to survive every change, edicts, science, mockery, modernity, and turn each into another mask. Ahead lies the final reflection. What does this enduring fox really mean when the lights dim and the stories rest? The lamps dim, and the fox walks softly into the close. For centuries she has shifted, from prowler of fields to whisper in the palace, from threat at the gate to image on a screen. Now, at the edge of this long telling, she stands not as a creature to fear, but as a companion to thought. Section 25 is a winding down, a reflection that ties the tales together. The Kumiho is, at heart, a story about limits, of sight, of trust, of power. In the beginning, she is a glint in the dark, a thing people cannot name. She feeds on caution, on the instinct to protect children and animals, on the quiet dread that beauty may hide harm. As the centuries turn, the fear shifts. The fox becomes a mirror, reflecting the anxieties of her world, the suspicion of strangers, the unease around cleverness, the fascination with danger wrapped in grace. Her symbols are simple but rich. The 9 tails are not just decoration. They are layers of age, wisdom, and unpredictability. The liver, said to be her prize, is more than meat. It is courage, spirit, the core of life. The fox bead, sometimes a pearl, sometimes a small bright thing, is the soul's secret, the proof that even deception carries something precious inside. Every element of her myth says something old and human, that we crave what we do not understand, and we name it to keep it close. Even the skeptic keeps her alive. the magistrate who wrote but doubted, the scholar who mocked but pinned a charm to his window, the colonial officer who catalogued but did not believe, each gave the fox another place to hide. And when she moved into modern forms, she only gained more lives. Television turned her into romance, films made her tragic, festivals made her playful. In every change, the core remained, a creature that watches, waits, and adapts. What would you do if you heard a fox cry tonight? Would you think only of animals, or would you remember this long line of voices, from farmers to filmmakers? Here is the thought to keep. The Kumiho is not only about a fox, it is about us. We made her cunning because we feared betrayal. We made her beautiful because we longed for what was out of reach. We gave her hunger because we knew ours. To chase her is to chase our own questions. What is safe? What is true? Who can we trust? In this, the legend's endurance is simple. It is useful. It warns children, entertains travelers, guides scholars, charms audiences. It adapts because it must, because the unknown is always near. That is why, even in a world of electric lights and cameras, a glimmer on a hill or a cry at night can still feel strange. Some part of us waits for the tale to show, and so we end, not with a hunt, but with a bow. The fox does not die, because she is not meant to. She pauses, watching. The wind moves, and perhaps a sleeve shifts, white against the dark. The Kumiho's story is long because it is flexible. In her 9 tales are 9 centuries of change, each hair carrying a thread of meaning. Hunger, cleverness, danger, desire, loneliness, wit, defiance, grace, survival. We began with a frightened farmer before a magistrate's hall and ended with film posters and lantern dances. Each moment was true to its time. Each moment asked the same quiet question. Who walks among us that we do not fully know? Every culture builds shapes for fear and fascination. For Korea, the fox was the perfect form. Native, intelligent, elusive, strangely human in its gaze. She could be blamed when things went wrong, praised when they went right, loved when people wished for more than they had. Her changeability was her strength, and ours too. We made rules to catch her and stories to free her, turning our worries into something we could speak about, act upon, even enjoy. Today, the Kumiho is mostly a character, but that does not make her lesser. She is an heirloom, a storyteller's friend. She carries old voices into new rooms, and in a way, she keeps alive something easy to forget. That mystery is valuable, that not everything needs to be solved, that sometimes it is good to feel watched by something we cannot quite see. So let the last word be quiet. If you hear the wind in the bamboo or a cry too sharp to be a bird, smile. It may be nothing, but it may also be a memory reaching forward, a tale asking to be told again.